Everyone has someone in his or her life that never ever shouts at anyone, or if we don't have them, we ought to. Um, it's interesting because even though we know that calm is good for us and we have an increase in meditation and things like that, we spend a lot of time tuning into radio programs and television programs that shock us and give us this sense that the excitement is everything. And shock radio, we give it a lot of negative attention, and it's not what they're saying, but rather the impact of shock on our thinking processes that's actually dangerous. We think about the obscenity of what they're saying or things like that, and we think, oh, that's bad. But it's actually how our brains process shock that's really bad for us. For example, my father shouts when he thinks no one is listening, which is actually pretty often. But my mother is one of those people who never ever raises her voice at anyone. So when she does raise her voice for any reason, it's a bit unsettling. She tells my father all the time, if you keep yelling, people just stop listening. So what's the point yelling unless it's really serious? And probably one of the best examples of really serious happened when I was about 7 years old. My sister managed to injure her head, but that's an entirely different story. Needless to say, after she got a head injury, she was supposed to go to the doctor's office. She wasn't allowed to go to school because they wanted to make sure that she was okay, which is what you're supposed to do with a head injury. For some reason, I don't know what the reason, my sister decided she wanted to go to school more than anything else in the world. And I remember waking up that next morning after she had gotten injured to some very strange sounds outside. There was a sort of a crashing sound, and there was the sound of screaming. And I didn't know what was going on. It was 7 something in the morning. So I looked out my window and just sort of to try and figure out what was going on, and I saw my mother there yelling at my sister with a phone in her hand. And I was completely baffled. I've never seen my mother like this before. And she yelled at me to just go back in my room. And I didn't even think about it. I did. I went back in my room. And as it turns out, what my sister had done was climb out of the second story window and just fall to the ground into the bushes outside of her window, outside of my window. And, of course, re-injured herself. My mother, who's a nurse, rushed out at the sound of what had happened and called the ambulance and screamed at my sister not to move, which of course she didn't do because she was so stunned both by what had happened to her and the fact that our mother was yelling at her. And my mother explained later that the reason we did exactly what we were told without even thinking about it or questioning it is because we were being yelled at by someone who never yelled at us. And she was right. We didn't think about what she was telling us. We just did it. It was automatic. I rather think, though, that if my father had been the one to yell at us, we might have had it turn out a little bit differently. We might have stopped and said, well, why? What's going on? And so radio, which is something that's meant to entertain us and inform us, isn't really meant to shock us. If we're looking for information, if we're listening to talk radio, we shouldn't be shocking ourselves. When we tune into shock radio, we need to ask ourselves, are we numbing our minds to what they're saying? Are we stunning ourselves into unthinking agreement? And is this really the best use of our entertainment time?